energy makes it to the heart, there's only one place it wants to go, and it goes straight to the brain. So the person starts relaxing into their heart when they feel this feeling, and the more they relax into the heart, the more their brain all of a sudden starts becoming aroused. And they start going into these elevated gamma brainwave patterns. Now, gamma is not unconscious. Gamma is actually super conscious. It's actually super aware. You're outside the program now. So when that occurs and the brain goes into gamma brainwave patterns, what we discovered is it's not a little gamma. It's not a lot of gamma. It's not a whole lot of gamma. It's a supernatural amount of gamma. And we start seeing these brainwaves where we see theta start carrying alpha, and alpha starts resonating with beta, and beta starts creating high beta, and high beta starts creating gamma. And you see these standing waves of brain coherence happening. And the person feels so amazing that they don't want the moment to end. And so we see when they put their attention on their heart, like filling a gas tank, we see on the gauge on the scan, this very low frequency start rising in the heart. The energy that's the heart uses to function actually goes up because they're placing their attention there. And where they place their attention is where they place their energy. And then you see the parasympathetic nervous system come up with it. That's the nervous system of relaxation. And then we see it kind of drop. And we see the sympathetic nervous system starting to go up. And now sympathetic regulation is an arousal, right? But the arousal isn't fear. The arousal isn't hatred or aggression. The arousal isn't pain. That's the arousal created from survival. There's only one other arousal, and that's ecstasy. That's bliss. And the person all of a sudden feels connected to something greater. Now, here's the beauty. We could see people do this in 15 minutes. The most important takeaway around all of this is that feeling that they're feeling is not coming from anywhere outside of them. No person's doing that. No wardrobe change is doing that. No sports car, no football game. Nothing is doing it to them. It's actually coming from within. That is the moment they stop looking for it outside of them, and the love affair begins. And so when we start feeling these elevated emotions, these more selfless emotions, it's not like you have to try to forgive. It actually is the side effect of you changing your emotional state. You no longer want because you feel so whole. How could you want anything? So we started interviewing people when they had these moments, and they had such an incredible amount of love that they felt. We measured their oxytocin levels, their love chemicals are very elevated. The amount of gamma in terms of coherence was 200, 300, 400 standard deviations outside of normal in coherent gamma. Now, 3 standard deviations outside of normal in gamma is about 2% of the population. 200, 300, 400, a lot of energy in the brain. So the brain all of a sudden is receiving an enormous amount of energy. So we've discovered relaxed in the heart and awake in the brain. And that process of transformation is your willingness to sit past that thought, past that emotion, and keep training the animal. And sooner or later, you can recondition it to a new mind.
And the system for this new mind and this journey that you're talking about is meditation. Like, this is coming through a meditative practice. Is that similar to the breathwork meditation practice that you just did research on, or is that totally separate? These
Wow. Okay.
two, yeah.
Yes. So our week-long events are a full immersion experience. We've done the largest studies on meditation that have ever been done, just because we have a community of 1,800 people that come to an event that are going to be getting up at the same time, doing the same thing, pretty much eating, making the same food choices, and pretty much a big laboratory, right? And so our discoveries in working with 1,800 people in measuring brain waves, their brain function before and after the event, measuring their gene expression before and after the event. We're measuring 2,882 metabolites in their blood. We're measuring DNA expression. We're measuring urine. We're measuring saliva. We're measuring the energy of the room. We're measuring everything. And meditation in a sense that it's not in the traditional way. What we do is we look at what really works. We're actually looking to say, well, that's something that we can actually see a change in. So we teach meditation 3 ways: to become familiar with your old self and to become familiar with your new self. That's what the word meditation means, familiarization, to become familiar with. So we use that model for change. To slow your brain waves down and get beyond your analytical mind is meditation. And you teach your body how to do that. And we've discovered a formula that simply makes it very easy for people to do it. You practice it, you'll get good at it, just like anything else you practice. So to get beyond the analytical mind is another way to reprogram ourselves. And then meditation is really about getting beyond your body, or disconnecting from your body, disconnecting from your environment, and forgetting about time. And that is that eye of the needle where we begin to make the most significant changes. So we're data-driven. We're really looking to see what it is. And when we see brains respond in the same way, it helps me enormously to teach the material better. And so the more people understand what they're doing, and the more they understand why they're doing it, the more naturally the how becomes easier. And nothing is left to conjecture. If nothing is left to superstition or dogma or even spiritual, traditional words. Use science as the contemporary language to demystify that process. You need to give people numerous times to overcome themselves and numerous times to connect. Sooner or later, you'll start watching transformation right before your eyes. And so one of the cool things that we've discovered is that we have so much compelling data to suggest that you're greater than you think, more powerful than you know, more unlimited than you could ever dream. We have compelling data to suggest that your nervous system is the greatest pharmacist in the world, that it makes drugs that work better than any drug in a drugstore. A drug study is about 18 to 25% cause and effect, causality. Our data is between 75 and 85% cause and effect. This is a person creating their own pharmacy of anti-inflammatories, their own pharmacy of anti-carcinogenic chemicals, their own pharmacy of pain relievers. We're seeing this over and over again. So we have this incredible data that says that this is no longer pseudoscience. This is really science. The side effect of a person's transformation has changed my belief in what's possible. I have seen people stand on the stage with stage 4 cancers that were in every single organ in their body that metastasized, and they have no sign of cancer in their body. And we have data that suggests that you put the blood of an advanced meditator and a uterine cancer cell, a pancreatic cancer cell, 70% of the mitochondrial function in the cancer cell is diminished. And the mitochondria is the energy packets of the cell. It's taking energy out of the cancer cell. It works perfect with what we're seeing with the testimonials that people are telling around the world. We've seen blind people see, we've seen deaf people hear, we've seen people with spinal cord injuries walk again, we've seen ALS change, we've seen all kinds of unbelievable health conditions changed by a person simply changing the way they think, the way they act, and the way they feel.
How long have you seen certain things last? Like, how much does the practice have to continue daily to sustain impact? Because I feel that, this isn't, as isn't a one-off thing, and that isn't what you're encouraging. Like, this is the experience of when someone's coming to a retreat or an event, they're having this incredible experience, but then do you measure how people continue to practice?
Yeah, it's important. Yeah, it's super important for us. And of course, we have mounds of data, but let's see if I can say this as clear as I possibly can. When a person has that arousal, where they're feeling that elevated emotion, and their eyes are closed, they're in a room with 1,800 people. There's music playing in the background. They're not eating, they're not smelling, they're not tasting, they're not moving about and feeling. On some level, they're having an inner experience, right? And the body is so objective that it's literally believing it's living in a new environment. And so that elevated emotion somehow tends to drag the body right out of the past into the present moment. So many people with everything from eczema to muscular dystrophy, when they have those events, there's a biological change that takes place in their body where they feel completely differently. Now, some people heal all the way. Some people are out of their wheelchair and they're walking again, but they're limping. And that doesn't mean it's over. It just means they made contact or they hit gold. And so there's varying degrees that we see. We've seen people for 7 years work on a terminal health condition. It took them 7 years to heal that health condition. Some people it takes 2 years, 3 years. Some people they do it in 3 months. There's no predictable menu that we can say it's this way. Now, when people have those more profoundly aroused states, it seems like their change is much more immediate and much more permanent. But for the most part, we see people's response pretty dramatic. Now, it's also important to say that we have seen people heal from terminal cancers, stop feeling those elevated emotions and return to responding to the circumstances and conditions in their life and return back to the same personality. The same personality is the same personal reality. And their body's believing it's living in that same environment, and they're feeling the same way, and they're in the habit of acting the same way and thinking the same way. And lo and behold, the condition returns. We've seen people heal themselves of Parkinson's disease more than once, have one response to some very serious event in their life that produced a very strong emotion. And in 1 hour, their condition returned because they literally went back to their old self. And we've seen that person turn around and reverse the condition again. Again, people do the best with what they think is available. The person standing on the stage, we've had numerous physicians and researchers stand on the stage, they're the 4-minute mile. They're telling the community, I'm the example of truth. This is no longer philosophy. This is no longer theory. Here's my scans. We had someone with bilateral breast cancer just recently. No evidence of cancer in her breasts or any lymph nodes, no longer in her liver. I'm looking out at the audience, and everybody's leaning in. There's the 4-minute mile, and that person's telling the truth, and they're telling a story, and it's not pretty. It's not always rosy. They went through a lot of dark nights. They went through a lot of their condition getting worse. But every day they had to show up for themselves. If they stopped showing up and doing the work, they would really not believe it was possible. But if they showed up and did the work, it means that they believe it's possible. And I think when you believe in possibility, you got to believe in yourself. When you believe in yourself, you got to believe in possibility. So it used to be a few examples of that. Now we have so many great testimonials, so many great stories that now it's becoming infectious, just like a virus or any bacteria becomes infectious. Now health and wellness becomes as infectious as disease. And you get a community of people starting to break through, and you start seeing these changes where people stand on the stage. Invariably, you're going to see a very strong shift in consciousness, and consciousness is awareness. And if you're unaware that you could actually heal yourself, you'll make the same choice. Once you see it, I think it starts creating a brush fire, and that's really the exciting part. So we're seeing so many great testimonials that are undeniably great stories of transformation. And many of those people still no longer have their eczema, still no longer have their Parkinson's, still no longer have their cancer.
Yeah, since the last time we spoke, I know your team of researchers went and did some work. I wanted to ask you some questions about this. You did some research on the impact of 1-minute breath work. How does this impact our heart rate variability, and how does HRV impact our anxiety?
Let's talk about heart rate variability, because it's an important thing. So your brain is trying to control and predict everything that's taking place in your life, because stress is actually created when you can't predict something, you can't control something, or you have the perception that something's going to get worse, okay? So you switch on that primitive nervous system, the fight or flight nervous system, and as you shift your attention from one person to another thing, to another place, to another problem, every one of those different elements has a neurological network in your brain. So the arousal of the hormones to say, pay attention, there's danger. As you start shifting your attention to each one of these elements that have neurological networks in your brain starts firing very incoherently. And in fact, you could actually, by thinking about your problems, turn on the stress response just by thought alone. And that's what most people do. So now there you are, you're sitting in traffic. The heart is pumping because it's trying to get blood to the extremities because a primitive system is switching on, saying that there's a predator, there's danger. And the heart is beating against closed arteries. And the heart starts beating out of rhythm, it starts beating out of order, and it starts beating very incoherently. So when you have incoherence in the brain and you have incoherence in the heart, when waves are incoherent, when they intersect with each other, they cancel each other out. And when they cancel each other out, that's less energy in the brain. If there's less energy in the brain, you're going to default to some of those reflexive systems. If energy is diminished in the heart, you're not going to trust. You're not going to be vulnerable. You're not going to want to commune. You're not going to want to connect. You're not going to want to feel grateful. It's not a time to feel any of those things. It's time to run, fight, and hide. Okay, so most people say, okay, well, I had a stressful day. I was stressed out the entire day. And at the end of the day, they turn on the TV and they relax. The important thing to realize is that if you're relying on something outside of you to change that emotional state, you'll become dependent on it. So is it possible then to begin to create more coherence in the brain? And the answer is yes, because when you're under the gun of those chemicals of survival, you're narrowing your focus on the cause. You hear something moving in the bushes, you freeze, and you narrow your focus. And it's that narrowing of focus that tends to be obsessive. When we're in stress, we overthink things, we overanalyze. That actually, we've discovered, makes the brain worse. And it actually makes the heart regulate more out of order. So then we said, okay, if the brain is narrowing its focus and it's becoming over-attentive, what if we teach it how to do something else? What if we teach it how to broaden its focus? And instead of focusing on something material or something known, just open up and focus on nothing. And the act of broadening the focus actually causes a person to stop thinking and doing and start sensing and feeling is actually what starts to slow their brain waves down. The redundancy of shifting your attention from one person to another problem, to another thing, causes the brain to fire like a lightning storm in the clouds very incoherently. So as you start to open your awareness and sense nothing, we've seen this thousands of times, those different networks that are firing out of order start to synchronize. And what syncs in the brain links in the brain, and the brain becomes more orderly. It starts to become more coherent. If you could learn how to rest your attention in your heart, and where you place your attention is where you place your energy, regulate your breath, start slowing your breathing down, even if you did it for 1 minute, you could actually begin to change your brain waves, and you could actually cause your heart to start functioning in more regulation and more order. If you said, okay, I'm going to work with my body, and I'm going to start breathing, and I'm going to start feeling emotions that I do want to feel. Yes, it may take you a few minutes to get there, but if you keep practicing it over and over again, the heart starts producing a very profound signal. It starts to produce an external magnetic field. It's measurable. So now you have a coherent brain, which means you can get very intentional. And you have a coherent heart, which means you can feel the emotions of your future before it happens. Somehow you have this broadcasting of this Wi-Fi signal. And the brain tends to be electrical in nature, so it sends out an electrical charge into the field. The heart is the magnetic charge. It's what draws things to us. It's the magnetic field. And now you actually, by changing the way you think and the way you feel, you're changing the signal in the field. And if you're able to maintain that state for an extended period of time, I say something magical is going to happen in your life. Something unusual, some unknown experience is going to occur. If you keep thinking the same way and feeling the same way, your life should stay the same. So we do 1-minute practices, we do 5-minute practices, we do 30-minute practices. We want to get so good at doing it with our eyes closed that we can do it with our eyes open.
Yeah, no, when I hear that, like I've had personal, genuine experience of that, where I've done that when I'm having a moment where I'm feeling anxious or I'm feeling stressed or, something unpredictable has happened and I feel that change in my heart rate and I notice my breathing change. I notice it become more shallow. I notice it become more random. I know that when I'm practicing breath work, I'm able to come back to stillness. I'm able to come back to that sense of balance. And then I'm able to actually approach the issue at hand with more clarity, with more connectedness and a feeling of confidence. But when someone else who may not have had that experience yet or may not be trained in that, they're just thinking, well, how do I solve the problem, right? Like they're listening to me and you going, well, but I can't because I need to solve this problem. Like you're saying, like, oh, I'm going to be 30 minutes late for a job interview, or I just had an argument with my partner this morning and I've got a big presentation this morning as well at work. Now I'm stressed about it because I'm thinking about that. Or my kid just I had to rush him to hospital and now I'm late. Like, I guess when you're looking at it from a very human point of view, it's really hard to understand the value in this. What do you say to anyone who's thinking and feeling that way?
No, I think it's a reasonable conversation.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes we have to be super aroused. And sometimes we really have to pay attention. And sometimes there are threats and dangers where that primitive nervous system actually works in our favor. And that's the emergency system. But you got to also realize that you only have a certain amount of energy. And if you're living in emergency mode for an extended period of time, there's no energy for growth and repair. There's no energy for long-term building projects. And so when it's needed and you have to outrun the predator, you go. Yeah. You don't sit and try to make friends with the predator. We're not that good. You run, right? Yeah. The problem is if you keep that alarm system switched on all the time, it gets very addictive.
It's a great answer. Yeah.
It gets very addictive, right? And so I've looked at people's brain scans and watched their brain get worse in the early days and tap them on the head and say, what were you doing in there? 100% of the time, they were analyzing the problems in their life within that disturbing emotion. And if an emotion is a record of the past and they can't think greater than how they feel, they're thinking in the past, there's no solution there. Cross the river, get beyond the emotion, and you'll see possibility because you're no longer in the box of that emotional state. Now, that's so much easier said than done because you're going against thousands of years of programming, of living in survival. I mean, 200 years ago, it wasn't easy being human. I mean, we're in survival all the time. I mean, famine, every disease. I mean, it was hard to be human. And so we have to lay down the very thing we used our whole life to get what we want for something greater to occur. And it goes against thousands of years of programming. It's not something that you get good at doing once. You got to keep practicing. So you really have two ways to look at it. If you're living in stress and you're living in survival and that system is switched on, then everything will be a threat. Everything will be a danger. Everything will be a reason to rush, to be impatient, to be frustrated, to be judgmental, because that's the consciousness, that's the emotion we're living by. So now you have a problem with a coworker, you have a problem with your partner, whatever it is that you used as an example, and you have to give a presentation. Now you really have one of two choices. Either be victimized by those conditions in your life and you stay in that emotional state. And I'll say to you, Jay, why are you that way? Well, I'm this way because of this person, this circumstance. That person or circumstance is controlling the way I feel and the way I think. Anything that controls the way I feel and the way I think, I'm victim to, right? Okay. Or I actually can be a creator now. Okay. So when it's the hardest, it matters the most. Okay. So there's going to be a story, a valid story that's going to go along with those emotions that you're going to have to give up, that you can address at another time from a different state. If you're altered in that state and you say something, you do something, you write the email, you send the text, you'll always regret it. You'll always say, I should have never said that. I should have never done that. We got to learn that we're in an altered state at that time. So there's only one of two choices. You either stay there the whole day and tell everybody that story, or you say, okay, let me take a moment. Remember that this is the experiment called life. Okay, let me practice getting relaxed in my heart. Let me slow the animal down. Let me practice. I'll take a few minutes. Now, let me breathe. Let me get my state back. Let me change everything. Okay, let me remember who I am, who I want to be when I open my eyes, and let me practice that again. Now, even if you had to do that 10 times in one day, I would say it was a day worth living. I would say it was a day worth living. And when we do walking meditations, in our retreats, we're doing walking meditations so you can practice doing it with your eyes open.
Yes.
Like if you're going to be relaxed in your heart and awake in your brain, and you can do it with your eyes closed, okay, let's take it out for a test drive. Let me open my eyes. Let me pay a little bit more attention to my inner world. Let me practice feeling this feeling. Let me practice feeling this way, and let my brain do what it does. Let me let me change my physiology. Let me change my state. Let me walk as the healed person. Let me walk as the abundant person. Let me walk as if my prayers are answered. Let me walk in this state. If I keep practicing that over and over, it's going to become a habit, right?
Yeah.
So we hit it as many ways as we can. We have at least 7 or 8 different breaths that we do because we see how they all work in the brain. We have all kinds of meditations. We have sitting meditations. We have standing and walking meditations. We have laying down meditations because we want you to be able to do it with your eyes open, with your eyes closed, standing, walking any way you can so that you don't default and return back to that person. Now, if you do default, you didn't fail. That's a program. You just went unconscious. And how many times do we have to forget until we stop forgetting and start remembering? That's the moment of change. No one cares how many times you fell off the bicycle. If you ride the bicycle now, you ride the bike. So it's the constant process every single day. And I think that sometimes we look for evidence in our life and it hasn't happened. And I think it's so important that we still show up.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that's where you're changing the most. And when you get to that point where you could care less if it happens or not, because you feel so happy, so grateful for who you are, get ready because your life is going to begin to change in magical ways. I'm so proud of our community, not because they do the work every day, not because they're trying to be good or please anybody. They do it because they don't want the magic to really end. The experiment is too good. They're going to continue to be a creator in their life. So then when they change the way they feel and the way they think and they start seeing evidence in their life, they're going to remember what they did inside of them to produce that outcome, and they're going to believe they're creator of their life and less of the victim of their life, and that's empowerment.
Yeah.
And you can't take that away from anybody. You can't tell me now you're too sick to do that. You can't tell me you're too old to do that. You can't tell me you had a horrible past, you're too out of shape. You can't even tell me that you never meditated before, because we have people that come, they know nothing, they get dragged by somebody, and they have the most profound experience because they're not expecting anything. And we have data that suggests that when you don't expect anything, you're going to have a profound moment. So everybody can do it. There's nobody that's so special to be excluded from this process. And we have had people that have had brutal pasts with abuse, with trauma. We've seen Navy SEALs and prisoners with horrible, horrible memories literally transform in 7 days. And I could say right now that you make the time every single day to decide who you're going to present to the world, and you get up as that person. You're going to fall a lot of times, but sooner or later, once you start to change, it's pretty hard to go back.
Yeah, I think we so easily forget that anything that we've achieved today, any place we've got to, was a commitment to refining the process. It was a disciplined effort to make a tiny improvement on something else. When you give the cycle example, the bike example, the idea that you got back up and you maybe changed one thing. You knew to shift your balance differently. You knew to pedal at a different pace. Like, you tried these different things. And it's what you're saying, that it's an experiment. If we keep trying the same thing, we get the same result. But the point that I love that you brought up to that answer was the idea that sometimes you do need to be an emergency, but don't make emergency a habit.
Exactly.
And I think that's where most of us veer off on the wrong path. I was asked recently, anyone who knows me today knows that I'm a hardworking, productive, high-performance type of individual. I live a very scheduled life and a disciplined life. And the biggest question I get around the holidays is, Jay, are you able to switch off? And I always go back and give the credit to my monk training and say, I switch off immediately. As soon as I'm on the flight home, I remember before Christmas, I was getting on a flight home back to London, and I was off the moment I stepped onto the flight. And it was because it's not because I'm special or because I'm unique or I have superpowers. It's because I've simply done what you said, where I've trained myself to always be present. And so if I'm really present in my work, like I am with you now, then when I'm on the plane, I'm just present and I know that it's time to switch off. And so I think the idea that our presence bleeds and our lack of presence bleeds, and it's not that you can selectively be in emergency here and not in emergency here. The state you're feeling is going to spread across your whole life. Like, I know a lot of people who are high performance, And I've had to be mindful of this as well. It's like they're high performance at work, but then they take that high performance and they give it to their family. And now their family is getting a high performance dad, and they don't want that. They just want their dad, or they want their mom. And so how do we develop that? I guess that's a highly trained ability is what you're saying is we get the ability then to say, okay, I know when to use this and when not to. That's a more heightened state.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's nothing wrong with hormones of stress. I mean, that's the only way we could actually survive. We're part human, part animal, part divine. I mean, we have two things at work here. I think the biggest challenge for a lot of people, and 70% of the time, people are living in that state of survival, living in that state of stress. The more you understand what that actually does to you, the more you can make better choices on how long you actually do want to stay there. Here's an example. Many people who are changing a health condition in our work, they start to do the work. They start noticing, I'm sleeping better. I have less pain. I got my appetite back. I feel like I have more energy. They start noticing these subtle subjective changes. They go to the doctor, and their scans still show that they have their health condition. So they're noticing a change, but they're not healed all the way. No, they don't say it didn't work. They say, what is it about me that I still have to change in order to heal? What thought, what behavior, what emotion? So they're a work in progress, right? Many of those people discover that they have one really good hour of meditation where they feel connected, they feel like their heart is opening up, they feel like their brain is coherent, they feel really great, they don't want the moment to end, and then they spend 15 or 16 hours of their day back in a program, rushing around, back in their emotional states, responding and reacting. And they realize that how could 1 hour of an elevated state weigh against 15 or 16 hours of my response to everyone and everything in my life emotionally is derived from those familiar emotions of fear or anger or hatred or pain or suffering, whatever. Okay, so now this is where the practicum actually goes to the next level because they're no longer just sitting down and rehearsing who they want to be. They're actually rehearsing for their life. They're saying, okay, when I see that person, when I'm in that circumstance, I can't go unconscious and feel this emotion, and I can't go unconscious and say these things or act this way. How am I going to act? What would love do? What would greatness look like? They don't know. They read about it. They get more information, and they're building this model. And now all of a sudden, their response to people, to circumstances, to problems in their life are changing. That's because they're changing. Then they notice that their health condition starts to improve a little bit more. Now they don't say, how come my Alzheimer's or my Parkinson's or my ALS hasn't healed? They're saying, how much more can I open my heart in my day and feel this with my eyes open all day long? If I understand that if I live by these emotions, I'm signaling genes ahead of the environment. Ooh, I'm going to stay in this state because it's this emotional state that is actually going to heal me. So I got to remember this feeling. I got to remember this feeling. I got to remember this feeling. And now they're no longer trying to remember the feeling just for any other reason, but because they want to remember the feeling when they're with their eyes open. Now they're understanding that the more that they change, the more that their health changes. And you can have the best diet, and you could do the best exercise, and you could be really rigid in the food choices and vitamins and minerals, and keep your body chemically balanced and physically balanced. But if you're not emotionally balanced and you're constantly in that fight or flight system, stress is when your body's knocked out of homeostasis. The stress is when your brain and body are knocked out of balance. So you could have all those things working for you, but if you are living in fear, or you're controlling and you're rigid and you're perfectionist and you're hard on yourself, it's going to make sense that is going to have to change in order for you to change, right? And so people start getting it. That's the only way I'm going to change. If I don't change, it's not going to change.
Yeah, one of my favorite things as a practical exercise I ever did was I literally had scripts, and I mean handwritten, like I wrote scripts for how I wanted to feel when I experienced ego or envy. And so for every emotional challenge I had, something that I thought was an unhealthy thought, I literally had like pages and pages and pages of scripts that were built up from research, that were built up from spiritual literature, that were built up from science, whatever it may be, of what did I want to be able to say to myself when this thought or that thought came up. And it sounds so basic, but it really does rewire your thoughts when now all I can think of is that script.
Sure.
And I need to update that script regularly.
Sure. That's a good point.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm constantly
it's constantly. Yeah, it's not once.
I'm constantly. I mean, 95% of who we are by the time of middle age is a set of unconscious thoughts, behaviors, and emotions. I mean, those are beliefs and perceptions that we have about ourselves and our lives. So, I mean, this is a never-ending process of self-discovery. I mean, there's always challenges that you'll have in your life that are going to initiate you into becoming conscious of what you're unconscious to.
Yeah.
And you got to meet those challenges from a greater level of consciousness than the consciousness that's created. And you can't, if you don't, your response in the way you feel and the way you think being the same, and if you believe that how you think and how you feel creates your life, if you don't change the way you think and the way you feel, your life's going to stay the same because you're the same. I mean, that's the way it works. So fundamentally, it's so important for people to understand that it is actually possible to change. It really is possible.
It is, yeah. I love that you keep repeating that because I think that's the hardest part where you've just, again, the broken record is I can't change, nothing will change. And not realizing that it's just a set of habits, it's just a set of routines that you've adopted as your reality.
And you're going to be uncomfortable, so get used to it. And so you could either stay uncomfortable or you could actually say, how do I want to feel? Instead of memorizing this emotion, let me memorize this emotion. Let me open my heart when it goes against everything that I've been taught and programmed to do. I mean, and that's really when it really begins to matter the most. So it's really an exciting time. And I'm so happy to see that people are wrapping their minds around all of this and doing it, doing it for themselves.
Absolutely, absolutely. Have you found a difference, and I want to get a bit more technical here, have you found a difference between meditation with breath work and without breath work? Because I know you do both. And what do you find is the usefulness and benefits of either?
So we do so many different types of breath for so many different types of reasons. The breath that we were talking about with Inspire, pulling the mind out of the body, we do that breath to take that creative life force that sits at the base of the spine, that energy that can create another life form. The energy we use to digest a meal, the energy that we use to run from a predator. We're taking all that energy that's stored in the body emotionally, and we're pulling that energy back up into the brain. If you practice this breath repeatedly, there will be a release of energy into the brain. We have the data to show that you're going to have a lot more energy in your brain. You're going to be way more coherent in your brain, and you're going to be more conscious, right? And so why is that important? Why? Because when you regulate your brain waves, we don't want you to fall asleep. We want you to actually be really relaxed and awake at the same time. So we do this one breath called pulling the mind out of the body. That's the Inspire series, where we're taking all that creative energy and we're with the breath, pulling that energy right up to a specific area of the brain. When you do that properly, your brain will go into an altered state. That's the reason why we do it. Then we do all kinds of other breathing, like breathing to change the heart rhythm. Sometimes when we're doing a laying down breath, when we're practicing getting into that mystical state, just when the audience is just starting to move into a slower brainwave state, we'll do a very forced inhalation, exhalation, over and over again, like a hiker's breath, only so that the person feels euphoric. And so euphoric that they don't want to fall asleep. And they'll move into a slower brainwave pattern, and the door between the conscious mind and the subconscious mind opens. And many times there's a mystical experience waiting for that person that's transcendental. So we do all kinds of different breathing techniques because we have different intentions behind each one of them.
If people want to dive into those, where should they go if they want to kind of grab some of those techniques or get access? Are they only at the events?
There's an online course that we offer called the Progressive Workshop.
Great.
In the Progressive Workshop, we teach a few of those breaths. And if you come to a week-long event, you'll have an opportunity to do all of them. And we start at 6 a.m, we finish at, I don't know, Cancun, the last one we did, I think we finished at 8 or 8:30 every night. It was just a great group of people. And we go 7 days, and some mornings a little earlier, but you got a lot of practice. You got a lot of tools. So by the time you leave, you can use them in your life.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, for anyone who can't obviously get to the live events, then the online course will be helpful. But if you can, go along to one of them.
And I think there's some good descriptions also in Becoming Supernatural, my last book, where we break it all down. And then there's some tutorials that we have on our website to help you with some of the breathing here.
I love that. Joe, is there anything I haven't asked you about today or anything that's on your mind and heart that you really want to share with everyone, or something you've been working on, or or anything you feel compelled to share?
Gosh, we
covered a lot.
we've covered a lot. We're doing some really cool research with random event generators, and random event generators are sophisticated coin tosses. The more you toss a coin, the more you're going to get 50-50 heads or tails, right? So this program machine generates about 1,000 tosses in a second. So you're looking at a very, very sophisticated machine. And if you run it for 30 minutes, you're going to see in time an equal number of ones or zeros or heads or tails, and you're going to see the straight line. When you get a group of people together with brain coherence and heart coherence, they're emitting a field. And when we do healings in our events, 100% of the time when we do those healings, those random event generators have dramatic skews to show that random events become less random and more intentional. And it's collective networks of observers that determine reality. And it's not the number of people, it's not the amount of energy, because it could be entropic. It's the most coherent energy. And we're causing a machine that's programmed to behave in a very, very different way. And I think that idea of community, of people coming together when everybody else is in fear, to show courage, when everybody else is in pain, to show compassion, when everybody else is in anger or hatred, to show love. I mean, I think by nature as human beings, I think we are wired to give, to connect, to commune, to take care of one another, to heal one another, to shine for one another. And our data is so exciting to actually support that theorem.
Yeah, I love that you brought that up. And that's very macro and big as well, but also micro in that you're measuring people's daily experience. I think, when I think about families who live together, or couples or partners or whoever you may be, when you're sleeping together, when you're waking up together at the same time, when you're sitting for meals together, when, we realize, and we know that the science shows that your heart rates sync up, like your heartbeats sync up when you're with someone. And I think it's really interesting because I think today in our individualistic world, there's a big desire to do things at our own time, when we want, how we want. But if you're truly trying to build a relationship with someone else or build community, there's so much to be said for doing these basic practices at the same time together, right?
It's really hard to be in community when you're in survival, because survival makes us put our attention on ourselves, right? And I think that when people are not living in survival, when they're out of survival, our nature really is community, is culture, is connection. And it starts with the self, then it starts with our closest relationships, and it builds out from there. And I think that's a healthy model, for the world. I mean, when you're working on yourself and I'm working on myself, and I'm okay with me and you're okay with you, we're going to be okay with everybody, And I think when we're not okay with ourselves, that's when it gets complicated.
That's amazing. Everyone who's listening and watching, make sure you go and follow Joe across social media. We'll put the links to everything in the sections there so you can follow along. But I want to make sure that you share with me your greatest insights. Tag me and Joe on Instagram, on Twitter, on TikTok, whatever platform you're using. Let us know what you'll be practicing. I hope that there's parts of this conversation that you'll listen to again and again and again, because you have to realize that the first time you hear it, there may be some inspiration, there may be some insight, but the second time, that repetition is going to help you actually apply, rewire, and reconfigure. So make sure you repeat, listen, and make sure you share this with a friend as well so you can discuss it, talk about it, put it into your own language and your vocabulary. That's such an important part of putting this into practice as well. Joe, as ever, thank you so much for making the time and effort. I know that you've always got unpredictable things happening in your life like this morning, but you chose to be here. And thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jay. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. If you love this episode, you'll enjoy my interview with Dr. Daniel Amen on how to change your life by changing your brain.
You want to drip dopamine. Don't dump it. Because when you dump it with the fries and the alcohol, the porn, you don't have much left. And so then you have to